Good morning, everyone. Very warm welcome. We're just admitting everyone into the virtual room at the minute. So my name is Anne Dixon, and I am delighted to welcome you all to this morning's session. Today we're going to be looking at leadership development programs, and as you're all aware, the forum is very focused on supporting our members in the critical area of leadership development, ensuring leaders are equipped for their ever-changing roles, and also that we're really planning for the future in terms of succession plans for our organisations. So many of you on the call today will be aware of the Forum's Women's Leadership Programme, which has been running now for almost 20 years. It was originally established to help address the gender imbalance at senior levels across the public service. And we're delighted at how much progress has been made on that particular front, although we're not quite there yet, and there's still a very strong demand for that programme. But the programme is also a wonderful example of collaborative learning with senior staff from across all sectors of the public service, building really strong and enduring networks, which really help in their work. So today we're going to examine the evaluation of an innovative leadership development programme in the Northern Ireland Civil Service. And I'm delighted that we've got Majella McCluskey from the Centre for Effective Services, which developed and delivered the programme with us, and also Jill Min, the Strategic HR Director for the Northern Ireland Civil Service, to provide her perspective. As always, we want this to be an interactive session, so we'll be delighted if you would enable your chat function and pop any questions or comments in there, and we'll endeavour to get to those later in the session. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to our chair, David Sterling, who was very closely involved with this particular programme in his capacity as head of the civil service. And obviously, David is looking at the whole leadership development issue now with a wider lens as our chair. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Anne, and good morning, everybody. Good to be here, and delighted that Majella and Jill are joining us this morning to discuss this evaluation of the Leading for the Future programme. The history of this probably goes back a few years, maybe around 2016 sort of period, whenever the civil service top team at that time sat back and thought, you know, what civil service do we want it to be? And we agreed on a vision which was really around a service that would be seen to be well led, high performing, you know, doing what it needed to do, very much diverse and inclusive, representing the society that we serve, and with a very strong focus on outcomes. We really wanted a sense that everybody across the civil service would be focused on those new programme for government outcomes, and would in some way or other be contributing to making people's lives better here. That was sort of broad vision we were working to. But we recognised that we did need to develop as a top team, and we had a very happy and indeed valuable partnership with CES in doing this. And it was a programme that was actually delivered through some pretty difficult times, actually. And I think it was important at the time that we decided that despite Brexit, despite the collapse of the institutions and the absence of ministers, that we actually needed to persevere with this. And I think it has been hugely valuable. So I will pause there, and I will let Majella set out what we did and what we achieved, and then look forward to discussion about this later. So I'll hand over to Majella.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Anne, for the opportunity to come along this morning and join you. And I also at the outset want to welcome and acknowledge colleagues at the Centre for Applied Learning, and I know Anne is on the call this morning, who were instrumental in this partnership in the delivery of this leadership development programme. So obviously, leadership is a key enabler of change, and it was for that particular reason that we in the Centre for Effective Services, where I work, began supporting the civil service with leadership development at its most senior level as part of an overall programme of public service reform initiatives across the island of Ireland, as David indicated, that began back in 2016. What we discovered, I suppose, was that leadership is critical for supporting change, reinforce the messages from the evidence, and also critical for collaboration, but actually distributed leadership across a number of tiers and layers was actually perhaps more effective. So I'm just going to tell you over the next few minutes about what we did with the civil service. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who CES is, because I imagine we might be a new name for some of you, and how we also evaluated what we did with the senior civil service in relation to this programme, but also more broadly, because I think there's a few interesting findings. So very briefly, to say that the Centre for Effective Services is an all-island intermediary organisation and a charity, and we were founded in partnership with Atlantic Philanthropies and government. And we spent the last decade or so building up our knowledge and understanding about how to support change in order to deliver better outcomes for citizens. I head up our work in Northern Ireland, and in 2016, our long-standing partnership with Atlantic Philanthropies, which had primarily up to that point been focused on the front line of children and families work, it moved upstream to attempt to support public service reform and innovation across the island. So we brokered an arrangement with government departments and the head of the civil service to craft 9 unique partnership projects. These projects were intended to embed evidence-informed approaches, better use of data, strategy development that was evidence-informed, building capacity in things like evaluation and collaboration. But most interestingly for me, I think, was the support we provided to the senior civil service in Northern Ireland in co-designing and delivering a leadership development programme. So we were actually initially approached by Sir Malcolm McKibben to consider this programme as a part of our portfolio of projects. And at that point, as David said, it had been a really challenging period. The OECD review of public sector had been undertaken. Thousands of civil servants had left through voluntary exit. There was, it's fair to say, quite a lot of political instability in the background, and a number of departments had been merged. So Malcolm had asked us to consider leadership development as one of our projects. And to be honest with you, this was a new project for CES, a new venture. Whilst we had been supporting change and supporting evidence use, building capacity, focusing on leadership development was a new area. However, the evidence was really clear for us that when you looked at the evidence around public service reform, whole of government working, and indeed how things get implemented, which is a particular area of interest to us, the message became very clear that leadership was really important. I had come to CES from CO3, where I had been the chief executive. We'd done a number of initiatives and activities around leadership development. However, as I say, it was new for us. So one of the first things we did was build a team to support this initiative. And we felt that insider credibility and knowledge was pretty crucial. So we invited Sir Peter Housden, who had been head of the Scottish Civil Service, to join us as part of that process. And we also commissioned Irene Hewitt, who people will know was the former chief exec of the Beaches Leadership Centre and a King's Fund associate, to co-direct the programme. And then we also asked Anne McMurray, who's very well known as well across Northern Ireland, to direct our coaching. So I suppose we approached the programme from a co-design and an evidence-informed approach. And I suppose the next thing that would be useful for me to do is just to give you an overview of what this programme actually looks like. So just bear with me while I very quickly share this. This graphic is taken from the evaluation report, and it'll give you a flavour of what we actually did. So the programme was genuinely co-designed. So we started with a whole swathe of interviews with senior civil servants at Permanent Secretary, Grade 3 and Grade 5. And I should have said, very important fact, this programme was directed towards the entire Grade 3 cohort of about 40 civil servants. So we started off with interviews and a co-design process. And we also encouraged participants to do some personal preparation through conversations with their line managers. And we instigated some pre-program coaching. Our first module looked at personal leadership. We called it Leading for the Future. And at that first module, there was quite a lot of engagement with permanent secretaries in order to position the programme properly. Then we asked the programme participants to take forward the design of some strategic projects that were important to the civil service, but also something that they could work on together for the duration of the programme. Module 2 was focused on teams, and we used Mike West, who's a very renowned leadership development researcher, to come and contribute to that module. Between Module 2 and Module 3, in preparation for a module focused on collaboration, we asked the participants to undertake a number of visits, and they did some local visits, for example, to the National Lottery to explore their approach to using outcomes, or the Belfast Health Partnership, an emergencies partnership, and also to some exemplary civil service teams in Whitehall. Module 4 was focused on leading complex change, and here we took an area from the Programme for Government and brought together a range of stakeholders to map out how stakeholders might work together to actually tackle a particular outcome or indicator from the Programme for Government. And then Module 5 was focused on sustainability. And again, we brought senior civil servants together at Grade 2 and Grade 3 to focus on sustainability. You'll see dotted along the journey, we offered 4 sessions of coaching. And I think it's important to say that we also brought an evaluation approach to the programme. So we were pretty clear that we needed to focus on sustainability and learning in the delivery of this programme. We had, I suppose, being frank, the luxury of investment from Atlantic Philanthropies. And that's a luxury that I think the public service finds hard to craft an argument for. So learning about this approach and sustaining whatever learning we could derive was really critical to us. So we designed, in typical CES fashion, a pretty comprehensive evaluation process, including identifying learning outcomes, a logic model for the programme, and then a pre, post and follow-up evaluation process, including a 6-month post-programme series of evaluation activities that we invited Paul Sweeney to help us co-facilitate. And we amassed quite a significant amount of data from that. And I suppose what we were looking for were indications of changes in individual awareness and behaviours, changes in team culture and engagement, and changes in collaborative working. And whilst firstly we were really realistic about the extent to which we could attribute any changes to the programme itself, given the wider complexity in the context that we were delivering, we were able to show that there were positive changes in individuals' own resilience, determination, motivation and ambition. There was, at the team level, an enhanced appreciation of the need for leadership visibility, better awareness of personal leadership impact. And then across the entire Grade 3 cohort, People reported benefits in build the opportunities to build networks and connections and forge relationships. And I suppose when we took away the program results and the learning from the program delivery team, I suppose we came away with 5 key factors that we thought were really critical for leadership development in the public sector going forward. The first was the importance of a commitment from senior leadership. So the oversight that the permanent secretaries and the head of the civil service provided through Malcolm and David was really critical, we felt. And it also allowed for a focus on leadership development more broadly. We also felt that it was really important to have a robust and appropriately scoped program design. So the co-design approach was really critical for building engagement and buy-in, and exploring the use of evidence throughout was also critical. We also drew in a number of experts across the delivery of the program. Thirdly, we also felt that the specialist trainer knowledge and experience was really important. So we needed to have a combination of that lived experience of leading at senior level, as well as really qualified and experienced leadership development and organizational development. Fourthly, an inclusive and reflective learning approach. So we use the group as the case in point. You'll see in the evaluation report, our learning styles are shared there. We tapped into the group's experience and expertise. These were very, very skilled and experienced individuals. And we also tried to be very practical and develop methodologies that people could learn from and take away and implement pretty quickly. And finally, we felt that the process to monitor and evaluate program and implementation and participants' progress was really important as well. So I suppose in finishing, we have continued to support leadership development with the public sector in Northern Ireland and in the South as well. We've just come to the end of a piece of work on shared leadership with local government as part of Carnegie's work. And we did actually go on and deliver a leadership development program with the permanent secretaries as well. However, I would return to the point I made earlier. How do we sustain leadership development in a complex, large-scale public sector body? How do we ensure that it has the political support? How do we ensure that it connects beyond the civil service and into the public sector? Those are just some questions that I'm still contemplating and that we could maybe talk about today. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Majella, for that really comprehensive overview of the programme and for those questions that we really do need to get an agreed approach on in conclusion. I'm going to turn now to Jill Min, the Strategic HR Director for NICS, for her reflection on the programme and on the way forward.
Thanks a million. Thanks, Anne, and thanks for inviting me along. I'm sort of going to approach this in a very informal way, I have to say, too, because Majella has absolutely given a really good overview there of all the benefits and the way that we did it. But I'm going to sort of reflect, if you like, in terms of as somebody who went through programme myself. So I was a new grade 3 in the civil service, and in fact I was able to go on the module before I even officially started. So it was absolutely perfect for me, but also as the head of HR. So as David said in his intro, this could not have come at a better time for the Northern Ireland Civil Service. In that, you know, we had a lack of ministers, we had reorganised, we had a massive phase programme, people were exhausted and things were difficult. And obviously we had looked at the OECD report. And for me, I suppose the crux of the whole approach was really around outcomes and that shift to, you know, constantly asking yourself as a leader the so what question, you know, the why are we doing this? What difference is it going to make to the people of Northern Ireland? And really looking at the why and the so what, as opposed to sort of normal leadership development programs. And I suppose that speaks to Majella's point about actually bringing about change. And so, as I said, you know, it couldn't have come at a better time. And I'm sure David won't mind me saying that there were regular times when we said you couldn't make this up. And then, of course, when we always talked about unparalleled, unprecedented times, then things got even more unprecedented. And now we have the COVID. So I think it's a really, really interesting time to be having this conversation. Majella has touched on the sort of, you know, what we got out of this, if you like. But definitely it was the more collaborative working. And that really struck to me how we really benefit from that. It was interesting to me when I started in civil service, and the first thing I did was go on this leadership development programme. Coming from Belfast City Council, I actually knew more people in the civil service than some of the civil servants knew each other. So even that informal networking, being able to put, you know, a face to a name, chatting, coffee, but you can't underestimate the ability to have that. And I think that is going to be a challenge for us going forward with development programs. You know, are we going to be able to do the overnighters and, you know, have 30 people in a room? Also, there was that real behavioural change. I think it really gave people a shot in the arm. People became more motivated. It sort of spurred them on in terms of their ambition. And that change in behaviour was really, really tangible. And that then kicked back in to people's teams. So, you know, leaders came off that programme, then went back into their own teams and started to think about how they could build the capacity, the leadership capacity and capability in their own team. And then that real sharing of learning and just that sort of looking at it. And for me, Majella, the best one that we did, the best session, we're all brilliant, of course, but the best session was that one about, you know, managing complex change, where we had all the stakeholders and we took a programme for government you know, action, and we looked at how all stakeholders in the public sector could really contribute to that. And obviously, you know, outcomes-based approach is really difficult. It is not easy. And just when I was thinking about this and the whole approach to collaborative working, yes, there is the collaboration, but I think the challenge for us now is about collective leadership, as opposed, you know, we use the term collaborative, and I understand that, but actually it's collective leadership for me, and as Majella said, that distributed leadership. So, you know, I think it was a really successful programme for us. So in terms of my HR head, if you like, for us, what we were able to do, and Anne Breen is on the call, the head of learning and development in the civil service, but we then took from that programme and we actually reviewed and aligned all of our development programmes as a result of that, from grade 5 right down to first line manager. So it was really impactful from that perspective. I think the challenges, you've hit the nail on the head already, is about sustainability and how do we get that collective leadership, keep it sustained. COVID has had an impact. You know, the fact is that we know we need to move away from the silo working, but the structure of the civil service and the nature of COVID has actually meant that people have had to go in, and let's be honest, with the return of ministers, we've had to go in and deliver within departments responses on specific issues. And I do think an opportunity will actually be the economic, societal and health recovery plan coming out, and that's where that sustainability and that collective leadership will be so vital with all stakeholders, and not just the public sector but the private sector as well. I mean, it's just crucial. So I mean, that's just my reflection on it, and happy to chat further and really welcome the chance to have this conversation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jill. And you've actually just teed up very nicely to the next speaker I'd like to call on, who's Kirsty McManus from the Institute of Directors. And we've talked a lot about collaborative or collective leadership and the importance of us working well together across the civil service, across the public service, and also very much so with our colleagues in the private sector and in the third sector. So Kirsty, I wonder, would you mind giving us a reflection from your perspective on your learning around leadership support in the private sector, and as well, is there anything you've picked up from the discussions here today that you might want to bring back to the private sector?
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think that's the message, is there's so much learning from the private, public and third sector. And that's a key learning, and we should be having more of those relationships across the three, industries, I feel like. I suppose COVID changed everything for us. And, we were very nervous that, we're moving into an economic recession, training budgets would be cut, real pressure there. But actually the opposite has happened. We've had a bumper year in investment and professional development, to the point where Northern Ireland within the IOD structure is number 2 after Central London for investment and professional development. So we've almost tripled what we would normally see in our investment. So that's really, really positive. So the message that I've been banging on for the last 3.5 years to our members is really, it has to start at the top. If we're not developing our leaders, then we're not making an impact on that productivity piece and that employee engagement piece, but also setting that culture of lifelong learning. So, and for us, people naturally fall into the role of a director. There's no de minimis legal requirement to do any training. And yet we're expecting people to be on a board and to understand financial statements and making decisions around key strategic focus for an organization without giving them the tools in their toolkit to actually effectively execute on these legal responsibilities. So a lot of what I've done is really director boot camps to give them that initial kind of scare around, you're legally responsible, and there's no excuse. If anything goes wrong, you can't say, well, I didn't know, because you're a director and you should know. So that message has filtered through. And as I said, all of our learning now, during COVID has been remote, and it actually has opened up a global audience. So anyone who's doing our courses are now engaging with audiences in Russia and Chile and France and Poland and Bermuda and the US, and it's creating those global connections. So it's been a very positive for Northern Ireland that we're seeing that investment at the top. And for me, it's about celebrating people when they do invest. So you'll see a lot, particularly on my LinkedIn messages, around congratulating people, but also nudging people to go to the next step. So for us, it's the certificate, then moving to the diploma, and then the chartered director. And I'm always very envious around the Republic of Ireland, who've actually, their qualification, the chartered director qualification, is the direct qualification of choice for directors in the South. And if you want to be on any of the, particularly in the central bank, if you want to be on any of the boards in the central bank, you need to have that chartered director qualification. So it's highly coveted, and that's what we're trying to mimic. But also, Anne, I think what we've done in the last year is we've recognized that, we need to provide more in the way of CPD and short courses as well. So we've surveyed our members and got a pulse of what are the big issues, and no surprise, technology, cybersecurity, data governance, all of those issues are really, really important, but very much for non-technical directors and SME directors. So we're now launched some additional courses around data governance and data strategy and cybersecurity. We've seen the attack last week with the HSE. That's a real live issue, and the boards, and with all due respect to some of our boards, some of them don't even know how to operate a telephone, never mind understanding the technology disruption that is coming down the tracks. So we need to make sure that, again, they have the right questions, they know what good looks like, but also it's very much from the narrative of an SME company director as well. And then the piece around family businesses, which I'm really passionate about, because so many of our businesses in Northern Ireland are family businesses, and only 3% of those will succeed from second to third generation. And a lot of that failure is due to lack of governance, a lack of external influence. So doing a lot of work with the family businesses and providing kind of a bridge with, non-executives, independent non-executive directors, and finding skills that, the family business can provide through that. So doing a brokerage service, if you like, for our members in those space, and also, you know, helping them lay down that structure of corporate governance. So, but I think the message has to be the same around the public, private and third sector. It's that lifelong learning, and that has to be really, really important. And we all need to commit to that as leaders, and, you know, support our leaders throughout that journey. And as many of our members come out of the public sector and transition to the private sector, and obviously we want more private sector to be part of the public sector boards, you know, we all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. So so that's the view, I suppose, from the IOD and the private sector. I think it's positive that we're seeing that trend. And I think, you know, for us, better directors will lead to better firms and ultimately a better economy. And that's the leadership dividend, as I like to call it. Thanks, Anne.
That's great, Kirsty, thank you very much. And really fascinating, really interesting to hear about the investment in leadership development in the private sector. And I think it probably goes back to Majella's original point around sustainability and the difficulty to create the narrative, really, to justify this sort of expenditure in leadership development programs, because obviously, you know, as Majella, as you say, you had the Atlantic Philanthropies backing, and you know we can't create these programs from nothing. And I'd be interested to hear from the panelists or from people in the audience about how to help to develop that the narrative that will allow us to invest in these sorts of programs. So any reflections on that, I think, would be useful for all of us. Also interested to hear from our delegates about leadership development programs, your experience of them within your own sectors, and is there any cross-fertilization there that we should be thinking about? Majella, if I could come back to you around another issue that is a frequent theme in CEF discussions around secondment and interchange between different parts of the public sector, and indeed from the private sector and the third sector into and out of the public sector. And do you see value there, and how would that help develop leadership teams?
Yes, Anne, I think that's a really interesting area for exploration. Just before I answer that, there's a point that has arisen from what Kirsty and Jill have said that I think might be interesting just to kind of explore. I think it's the difference between equipping leaders individually, which I think, Kirsty, you've outlined really strongly, and the importance of equipping leaders collectively. And a bit like Jill, I had worked with senior civil servants, and I don't know what I was thinking about. Was there some big, you know, NICS canteen where they all hung out? But I assumed there was a relationship there, and people knew each other at that senior level. But of course, they don't. It's an organization of 22,000 individuals. So when we started to interview individuals for the co-design process, memories were littered with examples of opportunities that they had had to go to Harvard, to go to the Federal Executive Institute, to go to the Civil Service College in England, and that had done a fantastic job of equipping them individually. But of course, when they came back, the landscape that they came back to wasn't on that course with them. So therefore, the challenge of implementing change in that setting was really difficult. And like, as someone who had raised resources to send people to some of those places, it was a hard lesson for me, but it was a really important one, that we need to be thinking about equipping individually and equipping collectively. And that is where, interestingly, I think secondments might help in both cases, because it brings the individual and the organisation together on that journey. So in CES, we have a number of inward and outward secondments at the moment. We have staff seconded to TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency. We have staff from the HSE seconded into our organisation. I've had a staff member seconded to the Campbell Centre at Queen's. And they are very, very valuable because they do allow for those boundaries to be diluted a wee bit and for just those opportunities of relationship building across sector to happen. So I do think that they have a value. However, they do sometimes have some bureaucratic or financial implications that I do think we need to think about. Sometimes they can come with a heavy VAT penalty that can make them challenging and difficult. However, we found them to be very valuable, and we're actively involved in CES at the moment in doing that. Another interesting model is the Scottish Leaders Forum. Again, previously in my previous role, I was aware of the value of that as a cross-sectoral leadership forum that it allowed for fertilization of ideas and building of relationships that was really beneficial. So.
Can I maybe come in on that, Anne,
yeah.
as well? Well, I mean, I completely agree around and as I'll not sort of, reiterate it too much, but it is that ability to actually affect change, I think, is fascinating when it comes to leadership development. Absolutely, people need the fundamentals. They need to know how to do their job. They need to know how to, as Kirsty alluded to, 1 minute you're a specialized whatever, and then the next minute you're a manager and a leader, and it doesn't happen just because you got the job. So you need those fundamentals. But for me, the fascinating and I have to say the most difficult bit is how collectively do we deliver change, and that change that is needed so that we are actually delivering outcomes, so that we can say what difference have we made. And I think there's a whole host of things around that. And one of the main reasons that I think that we really need to focus as well on diversity and inclusion in our organisations is for that. And yes, we need mechanisms like secondments, like external recruitment, like fast stream programmes, all of those things. But it's understanding that we can't lose sight of the actual reason for wanting that diversity and inclusion programme, because it's about bringing those new ideas. It's not just because it's a good thing to do and we're underrepresented in certain areas. It's actually about that ability to have, a diverse team that is going to come up with new ideas and is able to manage that change. So I think that's really important, that we don't lose sight of that, and that we don't think, or that we don't lose sight of some of the really, really important work that David did around this and that Jenny is continuing to do. And also don't underestimate, in terms of bringing about change, don't underestimate that just by some of the actions that are symbolic, don't underestimate how important they are. So, when the civil service and others, for example, went to Pride for the first time, that sends out a big message about the type of organisation that we are. And I remember walking beside David in Pride for the first time, and somebody shouting out to us, "You're not a whole load of stuffy civil servants now, are you?" Now, that's a bit of a, lighthearted and all the rest of it. But it's really valuable when you're trying to attract young people to come into your organisation, things like it, because we know that the private sector is ahead of us in this type of stuff. The Allen and Overys, the other, so they are ahead of us in terms of that, and we are making real strides, and we just can't let that up. And the last thing I would say is around, making that, yes, budget is one thing, but actually ever trying to be the person glass half full. I would say it's actually tactics as well, in terms of things like PAC report coming out, Northern Ireland Audit Office report about capacity and capability. I could put my head in my hands, I could get really depressed about it, but actually you have to turn it into your mandate. In a way, use something like that and say, well, look, actually, here's the mandate. A few of us have all been banging on about this for ages. It requires heavy lifting. It requires, a transformation programme. It requires investment. It requires this. But look, it's always hard to be a prophet in your own land. So, I think it's about turning things like that around to your benefit.
Thanks, Jill. Very, very interesting comments there. Majella, if you don't mind, if I could come back to you just for another question, and it's around the second recommendation in the report around how the programme is scoped. And did you find during the course of the programme that there was a good mix in terms of getting people together and then providing coaching and the different elements of the programme? How did you work that out? And would you have recommendations for those of us looking at future programmes in terms of a mix? Or does it really come down to the co-design for each individual programme?
So I don't think I would begin another senior civil service or senior leadership development programme, or indeed any leadership development programme, without co-design. I think that's really critical, to listen to participants, to hear their perspective, and to put something on the table that they can really shape. And I think one of the key factors there, Anne, is relevance. So it has to be relevant to their role and their job. Just on the coaching side, for the grade 3 programme, we were quite formulaic and said, this is what you will have. You will have 4 coaching sessions, and they will last this amount of time, and they will happen between this period and this period. And when we then co-designed the grade 2 programme, the grade 2 said, what about this? Why don't we have a coaching account? We will agree a number of hours that each participant will have, and the participant will draw down that coaching slot as and when they want. So they might want, a longer 2-hour session. They might want, pulse conversations that are quite focused, and that worked really well. And I would recommend that indeed in the future. So yeah, I think that's one of the key recommendations. I think the other thing is that the team, the delivery team, was really focused on pivoting the programme content if they needed to. So reshaping, listening carefully, and changing the content if they needed to. And I think the other thing was the balance between people who were, experts in their fields, and also drawing on the expertise of the individuals in the room. I think that's really important as well.
Great, yeah. So agile delivery, really, in terms of reacting to the participants. I wonder, David, if we could bring you back in at this stage, just in terms of the kind of feedback you were getting from your senior teams as the programme rolled out.
Yes, good question. I think looking back at this, I think the thing that was really distinctive about it was the fact that we had decided that we were going to train the whole top team together. Now, we did it grade 2s in one group and grade 3s in another group, but again, there were joint sessions there as well. And I think some people were maybe a little wary about that in the first place, but I think by and large, everybody agreed that had been what was really valuable. And it allowed people, and as Majella's made the point, it allowed people who thought they knew each other to get to know each other so much better. And I think the real value of this programme was actually seen in the way we dealt with Brexit, where I actually don't think we would have responded as well to Brexit if it hadn't been for the fact that we had invested heavily in building these internal relationships and indeed external relationships. But then what we learned in dealing with Brexit allowed us to deal with the pandemic even better as well, because there'll be inquiries and evaluations and all sorts of things. But, I think when you look back a year to that first period, during sort of March, April, May, June, the amount of things that were done in that period were just quite stupendous. And I'm not sure they would have been done as well if it hadn't been for the fact that we had got people talking to each other across departmental boundaries, which meant that whenever problems arose, like, for example, when we were working out how to provide support to 80,000 individuals who needed shielding, I think the fact that people knew each other better meant that it was easier to find solutions to some of those really difficult problems. So I'm sort of forward now, you know, and what we learned and how do we sustain, you know, there's probably three things that I think, from my perspective, are really important. Firstly, and that is you really need to continue to invest in this. You can be tempted during a crisis to say this isn't important, but in actual fact, you know, one of the bits of feedback I got, you know, during this difficult period last year from some of my colleagues was continue to find time for us to be able to talk to each other, which isn't just about the crisis. And that was a message that I think was really important. The second thing is you need to find time to allow people to talk to each other, not just in one particular group. And that was the real benefit of this program, was just allowing people to you know, time to get to know each other better so that they understood each other's individual circumstances, but also their work circumstances as well. And I think that is priceless. And I think we need to continue to do that. And then I think the third thing is there's a personal thing as a leader, is you need to show that you consider this to be important. So if you arrange something and you don't turn up personally, I think that sends a message that you don't consider it important. So you've got to invest personally in it. And I think one of the things that we probably didn't get right was the ongoing engagement between people at the grade 2 and grade 3 level. And there was, this was where I think, you know, I'll be honest, we never found the right answer to that. We experimented with weekly meetings, fortnightly meetings, monthly meetings. We experimented with having meetings where we had very focused agendas on particular issues, and then other meetings where we had very broad agendas. And if I'm honest, we never really got that right. And again, just dealing with a pandemic meant that we probably lost track of that a little bit. So that would be one thing that I think does need fixed going forward, is how do you get people together in a sort of semi-formal way on a regular basis that provides value to pretty much everybody who's attending. That I think is one of the challenges. But certainly that would be my reflections on what is needed going forward.
Thanks, David. And Majella, back to you again, if you don't mind. Rachel has posted a question on chat there about the coaches and their background. If you could fill us in a little on that.
Yeah, I've spotted that, Rachel. So thanks for your question. Just to say that we used 3 coaches for the grade 3 program, all of whom were qualified. And part of the reason why we used 3 was just so that participants had a degree of choice. So Anne McMurray, Irene Hewitt, and John, whose surname I'm afraid just escapes me, but if you do want to find out who that was, give me an email and I'll let you know. And they were, Anne and Irene and John had fairly extensive public sector experience as coaches, but the most important thing for me was that they were qualified and experienced at that senior level. So, and there was a high level of confidentiality and confidence. Now, you'll note in the evaluation report that one of the things that we did get feedback on from the grade 3s was a small number who felt that perhaps the coaches could have been a wee bit more challenging with them. So I think that was a good bit of learning for our coaching team. And I think something that they have taken forward into coaching that they've done after the grade 3 program. But yeah, that's basically the 2 factors, I think. Definitely qualification and a degree of choice.
Can I just say the coaching I found hugely valuable, and whenever it was originally mentioned, I was sort of slightly skeptical about it. But I think you're never too old to sit down and talk to somebody and get some feedback. I personally was happy not to be heavily challenged by my coach, but I still found it really valuable. Sometimes it's nice just to have somebody who can actually say to you, look, it's going to be okay.
And if I could maybe come in on that, Anne, I would agree with Majella in terms of, you know, the sort of the professional qualification in terms of the coaching in that, because I do think that people can often sort of get, you know, mix up mentoring, coaching, you know, and body and informal, you know, coaching. I think the way that the coaching was done, certainly the sessions that I had, was very much around taking the issues and actually working through them. So it was a real, you know, you used something that was maybe a worked example, and you used a particular issue or a couple of issues or something like that, and that's how you learnt, as opposed to, you know, mentoring, which I think is a different thing. So, and we have really moved on, you know, in terms of being much more open and thinking about coaching now. And I think you need to have that mix, if you like. So you've got your leadership development, you've got your skills programs, you've got your mentoring. I mean, we started with mentoring circles actually in the civil service, and they were women's mentoring circles. Now they've expanded. So I think it's that sort of menu, and you have to pick what's best. But I couldn't speak highly enough of the coaches that were involved. Really, really excellent.
Certainly, thanks. And I think certainly in the programs that the CEF delivers, where there's a coaching element, we do find a considerable degree of trepidation at the start of the coaching process, but really that our participants really value it once they've gone through it. But really important to have that distinction between coaching and mentoring. Couple of minutes if we've any final questions from our delegates. If you want to put your hand up or pop them into the chat function, we'll come to you. But just while we do,
just I'd be interested. A lot of the focus obviously has been on what we did in the civil service, but you know, there are quite a few people online here today who are, you know, in arm's length bodies or elsewhere, and I'm just wondering, has anybody noticed this change in attitude in the civil service, or are we deluding ourselves?
It's a brave question, David.
Because sorry, while people are thinking about that, you know, Majella mentioned the Scottish Leaders Forum, which we looked at, and again, we were certainly intent on doing something similar in Northern Ireland, and that is one where a combination of Brexit and the pandemic just beat us. But the idea of having a body where you bring together public sector, private sector, third sector in a meaningful way, I think is a really good one. I think the Scots have been able to do this quite well. But if anybody's any thoughts on how we might do that in Northern Ireland, even if they don't want to give them now, certainly feed them back to us, because I still think that is something that is missing here locally.
Thanks, David. And Majella, if I could come back to you perhaps for a few concluding remarks, and particularly if you could focus in on the issue of sustainability, and any reflections you want to share with us on that, or advice for the future.
So just to say, first of all, that this was a fantastic opportunity for CES. We learned a huge amount from it, and we were really grateful to work with Cal and colleagues in the Department of Finance and the Executive Office in the delivery of this programme. And it did sit within a wider programme of 8 other projects on public service reform and innovation that are available on the CES website. And I suppose one of the key lessons there was around the importance of distributed leadership. So unlocking the potential capacity of those in other grades in the civil service to lead within their own area, I think was one of the key lessons that really stood out for me. So in terms of sustainability, I am conscious of the importance of leadership development being recognised as valuable by ministers and within the wider governance structures in Northern Ireland, I suppose across the public sector as well. And I would agree with you that I think that we need to think about the narrative for this. I wonder, is there a temptation to think that people come fully cooked into these senior roles and land with all the skills and talents and capacities that they might need, and indeed all the relationships they might need? And perhaps there's something we need to do to change that story and increase awareness. Hannah's comment has just popped up. So I think definitely that narrative needs to change. There might be something in the wider public sector coming together to take this on collectively. I always think a collective effort always lands more strongly. But I take optimism in what Jill said earlier, which is that we're in a period now of recovery and rebuilding, and there is, and indeed Kirsty also made this point, and there is an opportunity, I think, in this coming period. We're going to have to do things in a way that we've never done before, and I think it is an opportunity now to start to pull together even more and deliver change in new ways. And I think co-design, co-production might be part of that.
Thanks, Michela. And Jill, a final word from you before we wrap up with David.
No, well, I mean, I would just concur with what Michela says. I think it's, and what David has said, it's absolutely critical now. We have had the impact of COVID, but there is an opportunity to really build on the stuff that we've done. I can see that the benefits of it. I don't think it's sustained enough and embedded enough that others will really, really feel the benefit. And I think it's a whole sort of package of transformation that is needed. And I think that this leadership development is an absolute key part of it, but focusing on that sort of the ability to bring about change. And that's what's going to be needed in the economic, societal and health recovery period.
Thanks, Jill. And Hannah, I've got a chance to read your comment there. Love it. Absolutely agree. We do need to, this will take time. We do need to work at it, and we need to keep at it. And organisations such as CEF, which spans across the entire public sector with those links out to the third sector, to the private sector, we will be continuing to look at this. And that's why these reports such as the CES report here are so valuable for us, to give us a good, strong evidence base on how to go forward on this effectively. So on that note, I'll hand back to David for a wrap up and a look ahead to what we're wanting to do with the forum.
Okay, thanks, and thanks to Hannah for your honesty there. It's much appreciated, and I do agree with you. You don't change culture overnight. I'm just going back to Michela's point about ministers, etc. I'm sort of reminded that when the OEC did their report on the sort of broad public sector in Northern Ireland back in 2015, they made, I think, 33 or 34 recommendations, all of which were accepted by ministers bar two. One of those that wasn't accepted was the OEC recommended that ministers and MLAs should undergo some training. So I think that gives you an indication of some of the challenges there. I do actually, being serious, I actually think that going forward, we do need to find a way of having a conversation with ministers about how we might actually train together as officials and as ministers, because if we want to be really effective in terms of delivering better outcomes for citizens, that is going to be necessary, is getting that team working better together, and not just civil servants, and public servants, third sector, etc., in the broadest sense. So look, I think this has been a useful session. It's been great to get the evaluation of that. I think, although I'm no longer head of the service, I think there's a lot of important lessons in there, not just for the civil service, but for the wider public sector as well. And I think the most important thing is that we never sit back and think, well, we've cracked that. There's always more to do. So I will finish on the point I made earlier, which is that if you want this type of leadership development to be effective, those of us who are senior public sector leaders need to invest in it, need to commit to it, and need to walk the talk. So thank you everybody for your participation. It's been really good, and I look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon. So bye from me.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill and Majella.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.